She wasn't here earlier. Okay. Arthur Keller, and then followed by Lisa. And then we have 3 more commenters after that.
Thank you. I prefer if people put the placards down while I'm speaking. You're welcome to hold them up. My speech, I appreciate if you put the placards down. Thank you. I do not speak for the placards behind me. Thank you. I speak for myself. I'm a resident of Santa Clara County, and part of what is occurring here is there's something called a regional housing needs allocation. And part of the analysis of how the regional housing needs allocation is allocated to the various cities in what is called a housing element is a flawed process. And that flawed process is because you're not basing those RENA allocations based on the local community's ability to absorb the housing, their local zoning rules. For example, I live in Palo Alto. We were told to create a regional housing allocation of 2,800 homes. That's more homes than we've created in any of the 7-year periods since Palo Alto has been expanding in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. We have no available land for doing that, and you're not taking into account the available school capacity. We have, our schools are completely clogged, and we have no additional land to be able to build schools. So you have to take into account the availability of schools, you have to take into account the availability of land. Furthermore, the issue is that if you think about actual ways of the way, if you don't think about fiscalization of land use, which is a fancy term, but the issue is that if you look at the way, if you want to promote transit use, look at the #1 transit center in the entire country is the New York metropolitan area. Not that we want to aspire to be New York, but the issue is the way to do that is by having a housing, jobs, and balance. You know, they're not promoting, the idea of promoting having transit use by having jobs in, you wouldn't put jobs in the financial district of San Francisco, would you? No, it doesn't make any sense. Because what you really want is, that's a job center. So you want to promote jobs density, which promotes transit use, as opposed to job sprawl. We're focused here on housing, we're not focused on where we put the jobs. So what makes sense is to think about increasing the density of jobs and putting housing where there's available school capacity and where we can build new schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly comment. The employment issue is something that has been looked at much more closely to date through this process than it has in the past relative to the regional housing unit allocation, which I know you're familiar with. If you look at the alternative scenarios and you look at employment locations and look at them relative to existing employment centers and transit served locations, you'll see quite a variance. It is in keeping with what you're talking about in terms of transit being a means to get to employment centers and densifying employment and really trying to look at housing along corridors, not just within individual jurisdictions. And that's part of what we're trying to address through this is economic development through job location in terms of providing locations for employment growth, but also the relationship of employment and housing relative to transit, not just housing and transit, which has clearly been the primary focus in the Bay Area over the years. The employment piece was really left out of the equation for quite some time, but I think you'll see that it's being given more of a look than it has in the past.
Thank you. Focus more on jobs near transit, because housing near transit, when jobs are not near transit, doesn't help in terms of transit use. Thank you.
Lisa, then Janik, Clem, and
that was a perfect segue, actually, because we don't live in New York, and most of us don't want to live in New York. And what might be interesting that you don't all know is that while New York is the most dense public transit-oriented community in the country, it also has the longest commute time. Commutes by vehicle has actually gone down over the last decade. Commute time by vehicle has gone down. Okay, I have from the National Transit Database lots of interesting information that would totally blow your plans apart. Because vehicle transit is less harmful to the environment than public transit. Per transit mile, vehicles are much more effective than rail. The other thing, and I'm not going to get too detailed, you can look it up for yourself, I'm sure you have access to this information, is that a lot of you are concerned about the low-income communities. and how best to help people out of poverty. Moving them to high-income towns is not going to move them out of poverty. It's not. It's just moving the poverty and spreading it all over the place. But with your $256 billion, I calculated out at $40,000 a pop, which is what a Prius costs, you can give almost the entire Bay Area a Prius, over 6,400,000 Priuses. And a vehicle, a used, I want all of you who are concerned about low-income people to know that a used vehicle is the very best tool, besides an education, a low-income person can have, because it means they're not limited to jobs that are on a commute line. And it means they can move out of the slums. If they want to drive 2 hours from the Central Valley, they can have a house with a yard for their kids. And they don't have to worry about their kids getting jacked on the way home from school over sneakers. If you want to solve our problems, solve our problems. Don't plan for us. No central planning. Take the data and work with it if you want to help people. Thank you.
Good evening. I work at a local public university, and I have the opportunity to work with and see how the next generation wants to live, wants to commute, and wants to work. The majority of them do not want to own single cars. They want to use public. There are college-age students for the majority.
Well, what are you speaking on behalf of my goals?
Please just let this woman speak.
So what I wanted, I'm just sharing what I'm seeing is all. I'm not trying
But
to.
you're not speaking for
So
yourself.
I'm sharing what
You're
I'm
speaking on behalf
seeing.
of adults.
And what I wanted to share is that a lot of them are looking for jobs and ways to get around without using a car. That a lot of them are biking, taking the light rail, taking the train to school, as well as looking for job opportunities that they can do the same.
That's a lie.
They're also looking for
That's a lie.
mid-rise and high-rise living situations that are along transportation lines. And the interesting thing about this is that it's because they see that corporations are actually incentivizing some of this and that they're benefiting from it because they are gaining some of their time back by being able to be online, using Wi-Fi while they're in the train, while they're on light rails. Students do this. It's valuable study time. All I am saying to you is that there is, as I look throughout this room, I appreciate all of your opinions. I'm trying to share that there are a whole new generation, the people who are going to be using this.
Excuse me, please let this woman speak. Please,
That are going to
nobody
be
shout over
using
any of the rest of you.
these, thank you, that are going to be using these, this new plan and the way that we develop. These are the people who we should be thinking about the 25 years. I'm just saying that in looking across the room, the demographics are not completely represented. I am proud to say that I am one of those who believes in high-density housing. I live in high-density housing, and I appreciate the fact of traveling throughout the world will give you a new perspective on how good planning can happen.
Okay, Jeff? We have two more cards. Jeff Wyndham and Dave. Dave Fadness, our last card. And Dave, did you handed me the card? Dave, come on up. This will be our last speaker for tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have reviewed, as a member of a county transportation-related commission, I've reviewed the numbers in detail about your 5 scenarios.
Excuse me, what are you doing?
No, he's just fixing the microphone. Yeah.
I appreciate it. And start the volume down.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'm quite dismayed to find that of the 5 scenarios, not one of them succeeds. I mean, just statistically, you folks have 5 scenarios, you've developed 11 criteria to evaluate those scenarios, and every one of them fails to meet not only 7, it misses on 7 out of the 11 criteria, but it also fails to meet the SB 375. So my question to you, first question is, will you toss these things out and bring some scenarios in that are going to have a better chance of succeeding without having to impose more draconian measures to make the first 5 succeed? Question 1. The second question is, if you are willing to do that, will you please take into consideration some criteria that factor in free market choice? After being in transportation-related commissions in this county for over 30 years, I've seen how the numbers ratchet up for supporting public transit and how the numbers have stayed stubbornly at about 3%. 3% of daily rides are borne by public transit, and at MTC we're spending 80 cents out of every dollar on public transit. One of the scenarios that you check should be addressing the 97% of us who do not use public transit. And in fact, some of the people who use public transit arguably use the streets and roads too, because they ride in buses. This would also address frontally this issue. A lot of the congestion, the air quality damage that's being done by cars is being done by stalled cars on our freeways that are grossly inadequate. And that damage should be addressed, and the consequent damage to our economy should be measured as well, because if we continue along this path of insisting on spending 80% of our money on 3% of our need, we're going to drive every prospective employer and all the people who are going to contribute most to our society out of this wonderful place.
Thank you, Dave.
I would just say that in terms of the alternative scenarios, they are just that, the early versions in this process. And part of the performance targets that were adopted by the agencies are a way to measure them. We do have to go back and we have to look at the scenarios, we have to look at local jurisdictional input, we have to consider the public workshops, we have to consider all of that as we develop the preferred scenarios. One of the factors that we will need to look at in particular is land use can only do so much in terms of meeting these targets, and there are a number of other policy measures that are transportation related that will be considered as we develop the further scenarios and we advance this effort. But again, we're really midpoint in this process, and you're right, on a number of the targets, the scenarios have not met the targets that were established by the agencies.
Okay, very good.
May I make one follow-up request? We spoke earlier this evening about March 9th, from 9 to 10 a.m. You indicated all of the outcomes of a lot of these visioning public sessions would be
Presented.
to MTC and ABAG.
Right.
May I make a request, I don't know if anyone else would agree with me, to move that meeting to an evening meeting?
Yes, yes.
So that the public could be there to also have either input or at least hear the findings of these sessions.
Very good. Thank you for that request. And that, along with any of the other comments and questions that were collected tonight, will be up on the website, onebayarea.org. And I also want to just recommend that you sign up for the RSS feed that will notify you automatically when there is an update to the website, so you can avail yourself of that. OneBayArea.org, yes. Yes. One more request.
Can you ask, when you're having these meetings between MTC and ABAG, can you request a half a dozen of these people to come to a session to represent themselves rather than the MTC and ABAG people? I mean, let's get some...
I'm sorry, listen, that's a good suggestion, and we will take that as a request as well.
Is that a suggestion? I mean, are you in favor of that, gentlemen? Would you accept a half a dozen people participating in the meeting?
Let's see. Let's take that under advisement, Ron. Thank you for that suggestion. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention, your patience with us tonight, and for sticking around a little bit late. We really appreciate it, and we will see you at our next event. So thank you very much.